Mother, I'm going to do some more video reviews. Just giving you a heads up. Alright, so, let's see. Not the guitar! So Psycho 3 tells the story of Norman Bates keeping his demons in check, trying to run his Bates Motel business, when a woman that reminds him of someone from his past comes along and tests his capacity for a relationship. Welcome back to the Psycho reviews, everybody, and Psycho 3 is the first sequel since the kind of rejuvenation that the series got with Psycho 2, trying to keep the aesthetic and the storyline moving from Psycho 2, while Anthony Perkins steps in as the director for the first time, and also trying to kind of bring a little bit of nostalgia with not only some shots, but with some aspects of the story that directly call back to the first film. This one was an interesting watch for me. This was the second time that I've seen it before doing this review. When I first saw Psycho 2, I was so impressed and like infatuated with how great that movie was. I did not expect that. I immediately bought Psycho 3 and Psycho 4 in that little Best Buy pack that they had whenever it was available. Watched Psycho 3, watched Psycho 4. Probably had too big of expectations for it, because I will say the series does start to kind of decline a little bit from here on forward, but not as much as you might expect. So starting right off with the positives for Psycho 3, I do think that the visual direction, the cinematography, the shots, the lighting is probably the coolest aspect of this movie. And Anthony Perkins being the first-time director for this one kind of impresses me that he was able to kind of get a lot of those with collaborating with his cinematographer and with kind of directly calling back to certain shots and aesthetics from the original Psycho. There's some cool scenes where the lighting is darkened quite a bit, especially around the character of Dwayne Dukes. And a scene towards the end whenever Norman is in full-on mother mode and the lighting totally makes that entire sequence creepy as hell. A lot of that is what's most memorable for me and most impressive as far as the sequel goes, is just the camera work, how they were able to really enhance the little bit of story that they have here with lighting and with moving the camera around. And Psycho 3 is the first time that you get to spend an entire movie with full-on deranged Norman Bates. The first film, you only really got that revealed to you in the last act. The second film, he's not the psycho one in that one. He's, basically for all intents and purposes healed throughout that entire film until the very end. So you get to this one, he's back in the state that he was in the original Psycho, where Mother has taken over part of his personality. Mother is the one controlling him. He's killing people left and right. He knows he's killing people left and right. He knows about his delusions, but kind of accepts them. He kind of chooses to live that way in a way. He's no longer confused about who Mother is to a certain extent, but this is the first film you get to see Norman fully unhinged and spend a lot of time with him, all the way through to the third act, which is my favorite part of this entire film, whenever he full-on becomes Mother, and you have an entire sequence of Anthony Perkins in Mother's hair and her dress, chasing somebody with a knife, and you get to see the entire sequence. It's not, it's not distorted to where you don't know who is killing like in the second film. It's not a plot twist waiting to be revealed like the first film. You know who it is, you know what's going on, and for the first time you get to experience all of it.
What did she do? Come to you, tell you that she was your mother? She was crazy, Norman, but she wasn't your mother. Neither are you!
I also like the character of Dwayne Dukes. He's a little bit heightened. He's a little bit over the top and a little, very movie character as far as his personality and his flaws and just how mustache twirling the guy is, but he's memorable. He's one of the more memorable parts of this sequel, and he's definitely acted well. He plays into the story pretty well as far as not necessarily being a villain or like a gigantic antagonist in the thorn of Norman's side. He's just this unhinged character that gets put in with all these other unhinged characters, and he's doing his own thing until he finds out exactly what's going on with Norman, and then he starts to become that thorn in the side. And it's just a nice little subplot that doesn't necessarily need to be in this movie, because the main plot revolves around Norman and Maureen and how he's kind of dealing with all of that. But Dwayne Dukes is like this little side character, this little implosion that's waiting to happen. I like his placement in this story.
What are you doing with my mother?
Don't you mean Mummy? You did a nice job on her, Norman. Fresh as the day she was croaked.
And finally, with my positives, I do think that this movie does a pretty decent job with progressing the story from Psycho 2. You know, Psycho 2 was kind of like a reset by the end of it. Now Anthony Perkins is back. He has his mother up in the window. He's full on psycho again. So from there, they could have just ended it there and it would have just kind of came full circle. But if doing a sequel is what they wanted to do, obviously, so they progress the story forward. All of the themes that they go for regarding religion and the test and the issues and the conflict that Maureen and her introduction into Norman's life and their relationship brings between the relationship between Norman and his mother. The whole aspect with him having to cleanse himself from Mother by the end of the film, whenever he's finally had enough, and Maureen's death just kind of has this huge turn as far as how he views his mother personality and having to stab her, you know, corpse.
Norman, can't you do anything right? How dare you
Treat your mother in such a way. Norman.
So I don't have the guts, huh?
A physical act of redemption, a physical act of rebellion, but mentally purging her out of his system, or at least just taking a bit of his control back if you take into account the final scene, that he's not completely purged. But all of that, I think, was a pretty good way to progress the story, and yet again, a decent enough spot to leave the story in to where if they decided to move on, which they obviously did, that it gives them enough to chew on to once again continue the story of this great character, Norman Bates. Now moving on to the mixed aspects, and the main one for me is Anthony Perkins' acting. Not that it's bad, it's certainly good, but it's not nearly as good as it was in the first two films, and I feel like a lot of that was because he was doing dual roles. He was director as well as an actor. And I feel like he hams it up a little bit more in this one. He's a little bit more heightened. He's a little bit, you know, a little off the charts too much for me as far as his emotion as the character. And I feel like having a director to kind of rein him in a bit and to kind of keep him within a certain box certainly benefited the first two films. Whereas this one, he's directing himself. Whatever he wants to bring to the character, he's going to allow it because he's in charge, and it just feels like it goes a bit too far in certain aspects. Mostly just with the character though. Like I said, the camera work and everything like that, he does a damn good job with that. It's just honing in his own acting and his own performance as Norman Bates. To me, there's spots where it just feels like it's too much. And I'm also mixed on the whole retconning of the Emma Spool storyline from Psycho 2. So in Psycho 2, you have this woman who's been doing the killing that entire film, reveals herself to be Norman's real mother at the end of that one, and then he kills her, puts her up, and that's kind of like his hitting the reset button. Well, this one retcons all that yet again and makes it to where she was Norma's sister and was just jealous and kind of mentally she was fucked up and wanted Norman to be her son, so Norma Bates really was his mother. To me, a second retcon in the same franchise within 3 films is just a bit too much. Not that I don't prefer Norma Bates to be his mother, because I think simplicity-wise that makes the most sense, but if you're going to introduce the Emma Spool thing for Psycho 2, stick with it. The fact that you're retconning it yet again in the next film, it just doesn't quite work for me. It feels like, okay, what's going to be retconned in Psycho 4 now? And now moving on to the negatives. And the main one, the big one, the one that really holds this movie back for me is the entire storyline regarding Maureen and Norman, because it just doesn't go anywhere. Like, it's so fascinating when this movie starts. It opens up with Maureen as this nun with this crisis of faith or this loss of faith in God. It never really explains what sets her off, but she's a nun that no longer believes that God exists, and she's suicidal, accidentally leads to the death of like the head nun.
I am nothing.
You can't! Wasn't your own sin great enough? You'll burn in hell for this! You'll burn in hell!
And she's on the run basically, ends up in the Bates Motel, and you have all of this turmoil going on within the character of Maureen that kind of parallels all the turmoil going on with Norman. You add into the fact that she looks and has the same initials as Marion Crane, and that kind of sets off Norman, and he kind of, you know, has these flashbacks and this crisis with what to do with this infatuation that he now has, which is the same infatuation he had that got her ass killed in the shower in the first movie. All of that, there's so many working, cogs to this storyline between these two characters, and by the third act, it just feels like it goes nowhere. It just feels like it's as simple as he's horny for this chick, she accidentally dies, and now he takes it out on his mother's side of his personality. It just feels like the movie sets up so much, and it sets it up well, and then just kind of doesn't do anything with it by the end, and that's the most disappointing aspect of this entire sequel to me, where that's the dominant piece of the story. That's the biggest piece of the plot, the biggest piece of the advancement for the character of Norman Bates, and the biggest thing that makes this movie stand out from the first two movies, which are a big shoe to fill. And you get to this, and when it just kind of peters out by the middle of the second act, and they just kind of forget whatever they were doing or don't realize what the hell are we gonna do? I don't know, let's just end the movie, I guess. It sucks, and it's aggravating as hell for me because they set it up so damn well in the first act. So many things could have been done with this character, so many things could have been done with that relationship that could have had so many of the themes that this franchise is famous for, and they just don't bother with it. I don't know whether to blame that on the script, or Anthony Perkins didn't want to go there, or all of it kind of combined into one, but it's a gigantic hole for me as far as my enjoyment of Psycho 3. And my final negative, which is not nearly as big or as brooding as that first negative, that one really bugs me. This one is just more of a personal annoyance. I don't necessarily like him taking direct shots and direct camera styles from the first Psycho movie and trying to recreate it, because it's distracting for me. Like, the big one is when Maureen dies and she goes off the stairs, and it's that whole effect that they did with the detective in the first movie. I can be honest, I mean, that's a weird camera effect even in the original 1960 film. So when you bring it over into a film in the 80s and you try to redo that again, it just looks distracting. It doesn't land the way that it did in the 60s. It wasn't back in the prime early days of filmmaking when people were just trying to do all these different camera styles. You've got a couple of decades behind us now. Just throwing that in there just for a little wink and nod, it doesn't really add to that scene at all. In fact, her death is supposed to be the big focus of that scene, and it's not. It's the weird camera effect. But with all that being said, guys, I still think this is a pretty decent sequel. It's not nearly as good as the first two films, but when you take into account slasher franchises and how bad some of those sequels have gotten, like in the Nightmare series, the Friday series, even the Halloween series, and you stack up Psycho 3 against a lot of those bad sequels or mediocre sequels in those franchises, Psycho 3 is pretty damn good by comparison. So not nearly as good as the first two, definitely a step down in direction, a step down in story, especially in execution there, with some really cool standout moments like the third act and a lot of the lighting, but it's a pretty decent movie to carry on the legacy of those first two films. So if you like Psycho 1 and Psycho 2 and you want to see where the story of Norman Bates and the Bates Motel carries on, Psycho 3 is actually a moderately enjoyable movie. Bring your expectations down from those first two films, expect a few more flaws than you got with those first two, and I think you'll walk away pretty pleased with this one. So check this thing out online and stream it. So what do you guys think of Psycho 3? Are you a fan of this one? Do you maybe prefer it to one of the first two? Is this your favorite sequel? That would be really interesting to hear. Or do you see a lot of the flaws that I do, especially with that Maureen storyline just kind of going nowhere? What are your thoughts on Psycho 3, and have you seen Psycho 4? Are you excited for that one? So let me know all of that down below, guys, and we will talk about it. Please like and share this video. Hit that subscribe button if you're not already a subscriber. If you guys want to check out some social media links for me, you can check that down in the video description below for Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and my Patreon page, which is a great way to give back to this channel, help this channel grow, and get cool exclusive content for your eyes only if you decide to become a patron. So check that out. Right below that, you can find my Spreadshirt store, which has all of my merchandise, t-shirts, bags, coffee mugs, stickers, all of that with very cool designs by my buddy Woody Bowen. So check that out, please. Another great way to support the channel and get cool Cody Leach merchandise for yourself. And if you want to check out some more of my videos, including Psycho 1, Psycho 2, or any of the other horror franchises that I have done so far, you can check those out by clicking right over here.